have you with us. So your book is called Being Different, an Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. And it's dealing with this very controversial and very interesting topic of Western Universalism. Could you define that for our viewers or just talk a little bit about what it is?
Sure. You know, each civilization has its own idea of the truth of the world, of history, of philosophy, religion, ideas of law, ideas of morality. And no one has a claim to being the only one or the best one or the absolute one. But the West, having colonized the world and having so much power over everybody else, and the language of the West, English, which we are speaking, having become sort of universal, through the institutional mechanisms controlled by the West in education, in media, in policy making, and through various other means, the Western ideas have become kind of globally universal. So Western Universalism is basically a term which means that the West's point of view on certain things have become universal. Now, just like a fish might not recognize water because it's so immersed in it, we are so immersed in Western Universalism, including Indians, that we might not even understand that such a thing exists. We might think it is universalism, it's real universalism. So it helps us to step out. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Chinese have created a kind of Confucian universalism using Confucian thought, Confucian ethics, Confucian modernity, which says basically that there is another way of being modern and having science and technology, but not necessarily imitating the West. And so while the Chinese are becoming very industrial and very progressive in a modern sense, they don't think that they have to Westernize in order to do that. So they can be Confucian in their identity and their sense of history and values, and yet be modern at the same time. A second example is Islam. Islam, while it hasn't achieved the same modernity as China, but Islam claims to have an alternative worldview of everything under the sun according to an Islamic philosophy. So there's certainly a Western universalism contesting that is a Chinese universalism and an Islamic universalism. So the question I was wondering is whether there's an Indian contribution to this discussion among universalisms.
All right, so your book is then a formulation of what you think that contribution is?
Yes.
All right, how would you say it in a short message?
Well, the first idea, to walk you through the logic of the book, the first thing I want to say is it's important to assert difference, because difference is a principle of the cosmos, and the only way to avoid difference is to make people homogeneous. And to make cultures homogeneous, it requires either you genocide somebody, or you enslave somebody, or you convert everybody to your point of view, or those who have an inferiority complex can start mimicking someone else, pretending to be someone else. There's a loss of diversity in any such method. So the alternative to this loss of diversity and homogenization into a single universalism is being different. So that's the title of my book, is Being Different. So that's the project of the book, is to explain why being different is important. The alternative to being different is being digested. That's the title of our next book, Being Digested.
Well, that sounds unpleasant. What does that entail?
Well, being digested is when one civilization gets digested into another and loses its own identity and its own selfhood. Sort of like a deer gets digested into a tiger, and the deer DNA disappears. There's not one molecule of deer DNA left, and the tiger has to break it down into smaller and smaller parts, and each molecule of the DNA of the deer has to be broken into parts, and then these are reassembled into tiger's DNA. So what survives is tiger's DNA, and the deer disappears. Now this has happened to civilizations. The pagans contributed so much into Christianity, the Christmas tree, Easter, a lot of things came out of the pagans, but the pagans themselves disappeared. The Native Americans contribute so much to Western culture. It's now recharacterized as Western, and there are Western pioneers and Western history of how these things came about, without even giving proper credit to the source. So the digested cultures live in museums. They're not thriving. They're not living. They've been depleted of what was good about them. And I don't want Indian civilization to get digested into the West, and I feel that there is a risk that that might happen, because a whole lot of appropriation and then recharacterization into the Western metaphor in Western frameworks is already happening of our tradition.
Okay,
there's
so
a huge amount of stuff that has been appropriated.
That's a very interesting argument you have, that this appropriation and digestion is already taking place. Do you think you could give some examples of that kind of thing that you see happening?
Sure. Well, a lot of right here in the Massachusetts area, you have John Kabat-Zinn, who has trademarked mindfulness meditation, but actually it's Vipassana. And Vipassana meditation, which he learned and wrote about in his early years, is a Buddhist system that cannot be separated from the overall philosophy of life of Buddhism. But separating it from Buddhism, secularizing it, turning it into modern medicine, getting trademarks and patents, and getting all kinds of NIH, National Institute of Health grants and so on, has decoupled it from its roots and turned it into Western thought. Another one is Herb Benson in Harvard, who took the transcendental meditation of Maharishi and turned it into his own spin on it called the relaxation response, trademarked it, and became a thriving success. Now, the issue with all this is that while in the short term it seems to popularize something without the Indian so-called baggage, which is how they rationalize why they're doing this, but in the long run you do not get the benefit of what has been left behind. A whole lot of the source tradition is left behind.
Right, it's the tip of an iceberg.
It's the tip of the iceberg, and the whole metaphysics and philosophy and cosmology and how it has to work with the soil of a plant cannot be left behind. You cannot remove the plant, wash it off the soil and replant it somewhere else without losing something. So the Indian soil, the roots have been denuded of the Indian soil, and therefore there's, in the interest of cross-fertilization, which I agree is a good idea, a lot has been left behind. Now, I don't want people to think that I'm against cross-fertilization, that I'm against the merger and integration of civilizations, because I do believe in that. But it should be done in an authentic way. The origins should be preserved, the original pioneers should be respected. New pioneers who just went to the East and brought all this, they should not be classified as the founders. In Massachusetts, they have alternate medicine. There is a curriculum of alternate medicine in classes, and they have a course in medical schools on the history of holistic healing. Now, you would think that holistic healing is one thing where they would certainly acknowledge the Indian contribution. But it is all Herb Benson did this, and John Kabat-Zinn came up with that, and Stephen LaBerge came up with that, and these big people who used to have gurus, who learnt at the feet of Indian masters, have now abandoned those and become the founding fathers of this new science in the eyes of Westerners. So the Indian knowledge has been digested into these new Westerners. And that is, so therefore we're either being digested or we are being different.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a very interesting distinction to make, and I think one that a